Welcome, everyone, to the Pick Six podcast, where we discuss all the biggest stories in college football. I'm your host, Chris Chang, and joining me, as always, is my co host, Rudy Tamarchio. We have a ton to talk about, from the Canes to the first batch of the CFP rankings to who are the real contenders for the playoffs. We'll kick off today's show like we always do, looking at our Miami Hurricanes. heads to Atlanta to take on the Yellow Jackets of Georgia Tech. Rudy, do the Canes get revenge for last year, or will they be running into a buzzsaw?
They circled this game on their calendar a long time ago, and it doesn't matter if Haynes King is back. He's already been announced as one of the captains for the game, so we're likely
Ooh,
going
yeah.
to see him. We'll see their leading tackler back from injury, too. I believe it's like their middle linebacker, and I don't think any of it's going to matter, whether it's a blowout or if it's another close game. Feeling good about our Canes,
Yeah.
particularly because we know everyone had this game circled after what happened last year.
Yeah, we've got a noon kickoff. The series is tied 14-14. It is the last stop on the revenge tour of this season. Miami has beat every team that handed them an L last season so far, with the Yellow Jackets being the most embarrassing loss. Last year, the Yellow Jackets went 74 yards in 24 seconds, scoring a winning touchdown with 2 seconds left to beat 23-20. Now, Georgia Tech is coming off their second bye week. Georgia Tech has been missing their QB Haynes King with an injury to his throwing shoulder, and linebacker Kyle Effer, that's who you were looking for, Rudy, for the last 2 games. But apparently they have been named captains, which means they will most likely play. What are the odds, Rudy, you think that both of these gentlemen play on Saturday?
I absolutely think they're playing. I mean, it's one of those where, yeah, the bye week definitely helps to come back from injury, but at the same time, like, this is your season at this point. They don't really have much to play for. They want to be the ones to be spoiler, as everybody does, because when you play Miami this year, you can automatically make like 70-yard field goals, and you end up having like your best offensive production, whether it's exploiting a defense that's having issues communicating and also just being up because it's your Super Bowl. So I would be very surprised if one or both of them didn't play on Saturday, to be honest.
Yeah, it's their homecoming. I have zero doubts that both of them will be playing. I mean, it's going to be crucial for King to play for Georgia Tech for them to even stand a competitive chance, in my opinion. They're a completely different team without him. And even with Zach coming back, or Kyle, excuse me, Kyle Efford, their star linebacker. He's basically their Mike linebacker, their quarterback on their defense. And I think he's really kind of going to be a competitive edge on the defense for them to stay in the game. Again, I don't necessarily believe Georgia Tech will win this game, but I think it will be closer than a lot of people expect. Georgia Tech has 2 key wide receivers in Malik Rutherford. He's kind of their screen guy. He does the quick donkey passes. Then you have their deep threat guy, who is Eric Singleton Jr., who are averaging 12 and 13 yards respectively a catch. So a lot of these Georgia Tech wide receivers all have double digits, because Georgia Tech likes to use the explosive plays, which gets me a little worried with our secondary. But something tells me Cam Ward's going to have a lot of time in the pocket. And so I'm not that worried about Georgia Tech scoring a few points, because I know Cam Ward, when compared to their defense, which we'll get into in a few minutes, will be lighting them up all over. And then also, like, both of those receivers have over 500 receiving yards for the season. So these guys aren't slouches. This isn't what was the old coach who ran the triple option again?
Oh, Paul Johnson?
Paul Johnson. Yeah, this isn't the Paul Johnson Georgia Tech you're used to. These guys like to go a little bit more vertical, which was a little bit different for last year. I remember last year's game, Rudy. It was one of those weird things. We when we came into that game, it was a weekday game at night. I believe it was a Thursday game. It was our ACC opener, and it was raining, and you could just tell something was off. I don't know. Did you sense something was off that night, off the rip, or did you kind of see the game going the way it did last year?
The only reason I sensed something bad off the rip was because one of the guys I was sitting with last year, this guy named Anthony Romano, who was in box one in field club, as soon as he stepped in the box, he just went, I got a bad feeling, man. I got a bad feeling. Like, well, what is it? It's like, I don't know. We're 5-0. We're wearing black jerseys. Something, this just screams letdown. It screams letdown to me. And every time something weird happened, like every Tyler Van Dyke pick, every like other issue that happened, he just look over, drop the sunglasses and go.
Yeah.
And then, the whole, not to beat a dead horse, towards the end of the game where they're running the clock out instead of taking the knee. And it's funny because like the entire time, 3 of us in that box are having the same conversation. We're like, I feel like we could start taking knees by now. And then
Yeah,
just
right.
hand the ball off again. It's like, well, if they want to give him some practice. And then we all like looked over and went, wait, what happened? And then you saw the replay and went, oh no, it's fine. And then you realized it wasn't fine. And then defensively, we're like, no, it's fine. They got to go a really long way. And then you can, like, from our vantage point, because we were low at field level, we
Yeah.
could see where Haynes King is looking, and we could see a defensive back slip, and we could see the receiver going open. Like, please don't throw the ball. Throws the ball, and we had a very angry night. So,
Yeah, it
yeah,
wasn't pleasurable, but enough about last year. Let's talk about this year. I don't think it's going to be as close as a lot of people think. I do. One thing that does worry me is Miami's 104th against the screen passes, and Georgia Tech is in the top 15 of utilizing those screen passes. So it's like our weakness is kind of like their bread and butter. So again, not to say that it's going to be a 65-52 game, but don't expect it to be like an old Georgia Tech Miami game of the past where we would go up 3 touchdowns and just kind of cruise on that. We do usually play well in Atlanta, which I always feel good. I don't know why. I mean, the history would say differently. It's actually quite even in Atlanta, but
yeah,
I always feel pretty good when we play in Atlanta. So it'll be interesting. Georgia Tech only has given up 4 sacks this season, so with that D line not being as potent as it's been towards the beginning of the season, the last couple games, I'm hoping that maybe Ruben Bain, Simeon Barrow can kind of get up for this game. Tyler Barron maybe show up, show out, and get this guy on the floor because something just tells me with Haynes King with it being his throwing shoulder, not to say he's rushing back, but it's like how good could he be? You know what I
yeah.
mean?
Yeah, the other issue too is he's a pretty mobile quarterback. He's a guy that likes to use his feet to try to get first downs. It's kind of what hurt Miami last year was him being able to buy time and get guys open. If your throwing shoulder's hurting you, you're also not going to be able to run that much because you're taking extra hits.
Yep.
So it's going to be hard to do like a quick passing game with that. So they might have to rely heavily on their running game. Remember, they're the first ones to expose Florida State for how bad they are physically running the ball. So if they try doing that, Miami has shown issues there in the secondary as well in terms of meeting gaps, and the linebackers have struggled to set the edge. So if they use like they take a page out of Louisville's book and go with misdirection runs, that could be tough for Miami to stop as well. And think of it this way too, that keeps Miami's offense off the field if they're able to keep eating clock by running the ball. So it definitely poses a challenge. I'm curious to how Miami's defensive line comes out to play because, like you mentioned, getting pressure on Haynes King, but also kind of containing him if he tries to use his legs, because I think that's what they were trying to do with Malik Murphy last week against Duke, and
Yeah.
it resulted in less sacks because you're watching them kind of like hold and try to essentially keep him in a box and keep him
Yeah.
from moving or stepping out. I wonder if they do the exact same thing. So that's where the secondary has to step in, because if your defensive line, your linebackers get like a coverage sack, basically, where then nobody's open for a long time,
Yeah.
it's helpful. But if one of those receivers get behind you, that's another story.
Yeah, I mean, I know you mentioned getting their run game going. It's actually funny you mentioned that because this team is plagued with injuries. I mean, we talked about their quarterback and their middle linebacker who are coming back from injury, but they're on their third string running back, so it's not like they're going to be able to ground and pound. I mean, he hasn't been that efficient, and they're only averaging 23.8 points a game, and you're going to need at least 35 points to keep up with Miami, in my opinion.
You need
You know,
50.
yeah, you're going to need way
You
more than that.
need 50.
But here's the worst part. Conversely, their defense is giving up 24.4 points a game. So it's like if they're only averaging 23 and their defense is giving up 24 a game, it's like that's not a recipe for winning. You know what I mean? You're going to lose
Yep.
more times than not. And there's zero. Their defensive line gives zero pressure. They only have 11 sacks on the season. That's 129th in college. So that's basically the bottom of the barrel
Yep.
for sacks. So I think Cam Ward's going to basically, and then they also have secondary issues. I think this is going to be another Heisman moment for Cam Ward. And I know a lot of people are saying we're waiting for Cam Ward to have his Heisman moment. And I kind of wonder, I'm like, are people
Where have they
watching
been?
it? Yeah. I'm just like,
Right.
where have you been watching it? And I get what their argument is. Their argument is that Cam Ward is having these great games, but they're usually in for returnings. They're to come back. They're comebacks. They're not put the pedal to the floor, take off, have him with a clipboard and a headgear in the fourth quarter.
That's not
What
Cam's fault, though.
exactly. It really isn't. And to me, it's like I think again, this is going to be a wild guess, but something tells me I'm seeing somewhere in the ballpark of somewhere between 375 to 410 yards with at least 4 touchdowns. Because again, this secondary has issues. They're ranking number 87th with 63 completion for opposing wide receivers, meaning more times than not, receivers on the opposing side are definitely going to catch the ball. And again, we saw what Restrepo did last week. We saw what all of our guys did last week. We've got a healthy core right now in that receiving core. And who knows? Again, there was decent action out of the tight end room last week, but something tells me we're going to utilize our tight ends a little bit more this week.
I love the personnel groupings though. Like they went 4 tight ends in the goal line a
Yep.
couple times, like that Cam McCormick touchdown. But you could see like what I love that what Shannon Dawson and what Cam Ward are doing with this offense is that you'll get the same look week after week, but there's always a new wrinkle out of that look. So if they're saying like, oh, there's 3 route combinations that come out of this look, the next week there's like 5 or 6 route combinations that come out of it. So I love what
Yeah.
they're doing. I love that they're introducing multiple tight ends into different sets because it started with like we even saw 2 running back sets last week with Mark Fletcher and Damian Martinez. So imagine a couple of like 2 running back, 2 tight
Oof.
end formations where you're playing some like superpower football.
Oh yeah.
That's going to be some fun stuff to watch, see where
I
this
mean,
air raid offense goes with all of
I,
these different tight ends.
I even love the use of Lofton as a fullback. I mean, I can't even remember the last time we even had a fullback dive, and seeing that this past week, and I was like, that's very interesting. It's like that's going into the bag, and so I think Shane Dawson's going to be he's going to pull one more scheme. Just and I don't think it's to necessarily go up on Georgia Tech. I think it's actually preparation for Charlotte
Yep.
and beyond. I think he wants to kind of get the guys familiar in game with some of these schemes and some of these plays, and then go from there. You know what I mean? Like, and really kind of open it up when we get into Charlotte and when we get into hopefully the college football playoffs. But Scott Strickland, the athletic director over at UF, broke the internet today announcing that he'll be bringing back Billy Napier for the 2025 season. I couldn't believe it. I definitely saw the writing on the wall, but let's look at what he said. So he says, Gator Nation, I wanted to let you know that Billy Napier will continue as head football coach of the Florida Gators. As we've seen these past several weeks, the young men on this team represent what it means to be a Gator. Their resolve and effort and execution are evident in their performance and growth each week. Blah, 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 blah. UF's commitment to excellence and championship caliber program is unwavering. That's interesting. In these times of change across athletics, we are dedicated to a disciplined, stable approach as focused on long-term, sustained success for Gator athletes, recruits, and fans. Yada, yada, yada. He goes into it a little bit longer, but I mean, Rudy, what do you think is really happening here? Why would UF bring back G5 Billy?
Okay.
It makes no sense to me.
So to
I mean,
avoid any
actually it
type
does,
of
but yeah, go ahead.
to avoid any type of YouTube issue, I'll just use American Sign Language to talk about what the statement was on that. And then at the same time, let's take that like 1,000 words that he wrote and let's put it into 2 very, very short statements. We can't get Lane Kiffin. We can't afford to buy out Billy Napier in
Yeah,
terms of they can't get anybody else that's better right now. Like remember this time we talked about this after the UF game when Miami blew them out to start the season.
yeah,
You don't get good coaching candidates that are available at this time of the year. Most people who are looking for a job around now and earlier in the season are usually people who did not do well at their previous stop.
that is very
So
true.
there's not really much there. Granted, we did kind of talk about this a couple weeks ago, thinking, hey, if Florida keeps it close against some of these teams that they have no business winning, like they should have won that Tennessee game up in Knoxville. They played Georgia pretty close for a half. These are things that you could get some complacency amongst the very angry jean short clad Gator Nation of saying, well, maybe they are turning a corner because they're in kind of a similar place from Miami, surprisingly enough, given all of their money that they don't have to, use state funding, that they're all very well supported with their boosters. They were not dedicating as many resources into NIL and to growing a larger football operations department like the rest of the SEC was doing.
Yeah,
So they're saying, well, Billy's building like Mario's building. And, year 3 Billy, year 3 Mario look very different, but
they do.
you can kind of sell a possible trajectory. They do have the hardest schedule in the country. No one's going to argue differently. They have another tough schedule next year because it's almost in reverse where the
It
teams that
is.
they had
It's
at
the same.
home,
It's the same schedule, just in reverse.
yeah,
It's like if
they
I
go on
played
the
there, you come
road.
here. Yeah,
Right. We're open. Well, we open with Notre Dame next year, but then we get Florida coming in as well. So it's another buzzsaw. It's another, measuring stick. Can he improve on this year? If he does the same, do they still keep him around? I mean, what? It's like a 60-something million dollar buyout. So yeah, I understand why it happens. It's good to kind of silence the buzz now because you have to preserve recruiting. What aren't recruiting experts saying too? This is a way of trying to keep DJ Lagway
Yeah.
from hitting the
It
transfer portal as
That's
well.
and that's what I think. I think this is I think there's two things. I think the Lane Kiffin thing is part of it. I think that's one of the reasons. The buyout another, but I think the most important thing of the reason why they haven't fired Billy and when they won't is they have to stop the bleeding. I think they need to keep DJ Lagway. He's their only hope. He is literally Luke Skywalker at this point for this team. He's in there hoping he can bring down the Empire, but that's probably not going to happen.
Is the
Um,
hologram Tim Tebow
Yes,
saying that?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. He 100% with Steve Spurrier being R2D2. Um, it's just things are bad in Gainesville. I mean, the Gators are currently 4-4, 2-3 in the SEC. I mean, this will be the ninth time in 15 years they'll walk away from a season unranked. I mean, that is again, and I love this rhetoric of we're championship contenders and we're used to winning and don't get me wrong, yes, the Gators have been uber successful under Urban Meyer, right? For that tenure that they were there. But like in my lifetime, I'm 40 years old, okay? They were never national championship contenders. That was never the SEC for sure. They can compete for an SEC championship. But it's not like the Gators were going and they were in the mix to play for a national championship. Not like UM was. And I'm not saying that as a homer. I'm just saying that as
No.
very matter of fact. Like were Florida State and UM the gems of college football during the late 80s, 90s? Absolutely. But it was always understood that UF was little brother and they came third in the line.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It was
They were
always
third.
it was always UM and FSU jockeying for 1 and 2, and then little brother was always there. So I think it's a little funny that, this revisionist history that they have because they had Urban Meyer for a few years, that they're like, we're a championship caliber program and that's what we do. We win championships here. And I'm like, okay,
Well,
that,
and that's an SEC thing too, right? Like, how
yeah.
many of them are all saying that they're the perennial power, they're used to winning? Like, let's give a history lesson. You already mentioned that Florida, if you look at kind of the prestige of the three schools of Florida, they are number 3 on that list. Miami
Mhm.
being number 1, Florida State being number 2. The frequency, yes, Florida and Florida State are both tied for the same number of national championships with 3. It hurts me, and I'm sure it hurts you too, that we can't, as of a couple of years ago with Jameis Winston, we can't say that we have more titles than them combined.
Right.
But Miami
Well,
is
we do
5.
we do minus that discrepancy in Arizona.
Yes, exactly. We 6, but 5 officially.
Yeah.
And look, Florida stopped playing Miami in 1987 was the last game, and they were citing the difficulty of the SEC schedule even back then. But if you look
Oh
at the late
Lord.
80s, the teams that dominated college football were Miami, who was then an independent, Notre Dame, which was then an independent. Um, and then really there were no SEC teams in the mix. It was Nebraska, who was Big 8 at the time, Oklahoma, which was Big 8 at the time. And those are really the 4 national championship programs of that era.
Yep. And
And
then you
Penn State had a couple good years,
yeah.
like,
And then you had
yeah.
like then
So
you had like these randos where Colorado had a good year in 90, Georgia Tech shared it with them. Then you had like Tennessee won 1 year, Virginia Tech won 1 year, but these are like one-offs.
right.
When you're talking about programs that are consistently playing, I mean, I think what do we go to the national championship 5 years in a row almost? I think it was between like 87 and like 93 or something like
There's a
that.
lot of times.
There,
Granted,
yeah,
like
I mean, we didn't win
the
them all, but like
definition,
we still went, and
right.
that's what's important to me. Is it's like it's like Alabama, right, or Clemson, from like 2010 to like 2020. Like
Yeah.
those two programs were consistently playing for national championships. But I think it's funny because when you look at Napier's record at Florida, it suggests that he might not be up to task to playing and being the coach there. I mean, he's 15 and 18, and his winning percentage is way worse than Dan Mullen, who got let go, who was 34 and 15. Jim
Yep.
McElwain, who was 22 and 12. Will Muschamp, God, when Will Muschamp is better than you, 28 and 21, good Lord.
Yeah. And they had no offense back then. It was
Yeah,
literally just a straight up defensive football team. They'd win with 13 points.
yeah. I mean, the I get the idea of why you hired him because out at Louisiana he was 40 and 12, and that looks really good. You're trying to basically strike gold again and pull like another Urban Meyer where you're pulling a guy from a G5 program who's been uber successful and he'll maybe bring the same success. But It was Urban's day and Billy Napier's day and the G5 were two completely different times. There were two completely different times in football, and the fact that they trusted Billy with that, I think he wasn't cut out for it. I think Billy needed to get to a P4 P well P5 at the time
Yeah.
program, cut his teeth on that a little bit, kind of like what Manny Diaz. Like Manny Diaz will tell you the same thing. Like Manny Diaz, the reason why Manny Diaz got hired is because Rick had to leave so abruptly because of, the disease he was battling. You know what I mean? But
Yep.
and Manny was set to go to Temple. And with Rick leaving, there was a massive hole there, and we just threw money at Manny and said, "Hey, like, just take over." He wasn't ready. I think if Manny would have gone to Temple for a few years, done the things he would have done, we would have a different Manny Diaz. It would be a completely different uh, history right now. You know what I mean? And I think the same thing applies to Billy, and we're seeing that now. I think this program and the responsibilities and the expectations were just way, way, way too high. You talk about that $66 million buyout. To break that down really quick, it's 26 million to buy Billy out. You'd have to pay him for filing him early. But then they're estimating to bring in a new coach, pay off that coach, and then bring in his assistants. It would be 40 million. And just no one has that. And I think, who do you get, like you mentioned? Lane doesn't want it. Who else really is there that's worth $66 million? Because you look at the cautionary tale of Texas A&M and what happened with Jimbo Fisher, and no one wants to repeat that again. I mean,
Yep.
FSU is pretty damn close with with the extension for Mike Norvell last year, and then them going, which they'll probably end up only getting 2 wins this season if they're lucky. It's just, ah, man. I think again, I think it's too there. What this is realistically, it's a band-aid over a wound. They're not. They need to cauterize or cut the limb off, in my opinion. But I think they know the program will officially tank because they've been losing recruits, just like FSU
Yeah.
has. Both FSU and UF have been bleeding recruits in the last 2 months, and it's been really horrible for the program to the point to where, again, they think the only way Lagway would stay is if Billy Napier stayed. So
Yep.
I sadly, I don't think Billy's going to have much better of a year next year. I don't think they're going to get the caliber of players they're going to need to compete, and the teams that are playing this year are only gonna get better.
Yeah.
I can't see them improving and flipping that, even to get 7 wins. Go 7-5. I don't see
It's
that
not
happen.
enough. It's
It's
not enough for that fan base either. Like you
it,
mentioned, if they get a different coach, like if they get somebody else, clock immediately starts ticking because they expect results right away.
but that's the thing with college football now. You can't do that. It's impossible to win in 3 years for this pure reason. If a kid, it's not even so much the coach, it's more if the kid doesn't like the program, he's out. So you're
Yep.
not keeping the same kids for 2, 3, 4 years. You have a one and done. So every year is almost like a rebuild. What you need is you need a coach who has a proven history, who can scheme well, who can hire great assistants, which is, again, I'm not trying to toot our horn here, okay? And I don't want to sound like a homer, but I think it's a great way of just comparing two things. When you look at Mario, right, and you look at Billy, they're both in their third year. Mario inherited a program that was in shambles. I mean, he was very, very cordial in the way he described it, his first year. But when there's a documentary, the U Part 3, something tells me we're going to get the real story of how horrible the locker room was and the talent gap there was that first year. And
Yep.
you see the upward trajectory. Now, are we going to be a 12-0 and 11-1 team next year? Because no, we're not gonna have Cam Warren. We're not gonna have a lot of the players we have. But my point still is there's an upward trajectory. You can see that. Look at Mario. He's gone through two coordinators on both sides of the ball, both defensively and offensively. And he still managed to find success. When you lose coordinators like that, I mean, I feel bad for Tyler Van Dyke because he never had the same coordinator for more than a year. But
Yeah.
like you have that kind of turnaround, your program should be in the dumps, and we are slowly going up. So that's why I use these two as an example because it's not so much about like, oh, like, did you come from a proven program? It's, can you scheme well and can you hire well? Because those two things are what's going to keep kids in the school. And that is the name of the game now. It's recruiting and keeping kids in house, which a lot of people didn't have to do. And so between Florida and Florida State, it's great for us. I'm happy to see it.
Take it.
I mean, it's
I'll take it all day.
it's going to be amazing. But at the same time, I also am like, Well, what does that mean for Florida recruits? Because hopefully they'll stay here, but if they don't, my Nick Saban theory, which we'll get into in the offseason, may backfire because these two programs are not succeeding and we can't keep that talent home. So we will see with poor Billy, man, that poor guy. But Rudy, something major happened this week that affected millions. Do you remember what that was?
Are we becoming a political podcast and talking about elections?
No, 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 not that. We're going to
Okay,
talk
good.
about the first college football rankings were released. And even
That
though we all know that this is just the beginning, we are seeing a lot of rage at the rankings. Brand bias is what many people are is finding there as their biggest gripes. Do you see it that way? Do you think there was a little brand bias?
I think there was a little bit, but to be honest with you, does it really matter at this point? Just like how we talk about the first AP poll that comes out in week one, I think the first college football playoff poll is the same way because they by design put teams in that you know are going to face each other and likely cancel each other out towards the end of the season to make the final rankings.
Yeah,
So I'm not too worried about it now. Like I'm trying to think of like a couple of teams that are complaining right now that they're not in that final 12, but there's still so many games to play out with. Like, granted, Miami is ranked, fourth in the college football playoff rankings, but expected to win the ACC, so they'll be a 3 seed.
right.
Okay, fine for us on that side. But like,
Which
if you're
we'll
looking at what,
we'll break down how they did it, but
right?
really quick, just to let everyone know, if you're not familiar with how this is going to work. So there's a committee that's going to put together rankings each week, 1 through 25, obviously. And then from there, they'll take that batch of rankings and then they'll start filling the seats. Now, just because you're a number one or number two doesn't mean you'll be the number one or number two seed. It's based upon your conference championship. What did you win? My assumption is they're going to put an SEC, but now that I'm thinking about this, they might actually put a Big Ten as the number one seed, and then the SEC as a number two. But I was watching this, and at first I was like, "Oh, these are pretty standard. This is what kind of I expected." There were a few little surprises. I thought Pitt at 24 was interesting. Colorado at number 25 was great. It was amazing
Mhm.
seeing how many. I think there was four ACC teams. In
Yeah.
the top 25? Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there were.
Miami, SMU, Louisville, and Pitt, I think we're all in the top 25.
Yeah, but this is where I started to delve a little bit deeper and start looking between the lines. I didn't look at so much the numbers, so much as the placement. So if you look at the top 12, if you'll notice there are four Big Ten and there are four SEC. And my question, my worry is again, we know these things are going to be fluid. We know some of these teams are going to be playing each other. But are they placement holders for other teams moving forward, Rudy?
It's possible. I mean, look, we were talking about probably four Big Ten teams getting in no matter what. But I think if there's still more cannibalization in the SEC, I don't think you're gonna be able to get away with having like a 3-loss SEC team. You could probably get away with like a third place team that has 2 losses, but at that point, you got to go back and look at strong independence, and it all shapes on like how the group of five comes out. Because right now, Boise State is the darling that's going to be the group of five, person to get in. But like, what are you going to do if there's like another 1-loss group of five that looks pretty good? I mean, that could throw everything off. It's just a matter of how the rest of that SEC schedule works out. Because of course they're going to favor it. They have the TV money behind them. They have the attendance numbers behind them. It's just how the records play.
Yeah, I thought it was. There's actually five ACC teams. I was just going through. It was nice to see Pitt at 18. I think deservedly so. Even though they got blown out by SMU. I still think they're a
Smoked.
decent they're a decent team. You know what I mean? And especially with some of these teams that are ranked in here, I think they're definitely better than that. I thought Clemson falling all the way to 23 was a little dramatic, and let me explain why. Because I know everyone's saying Clemson's garbage. They haven't played anyone, and they deserve to be that low, or if not ranked. But let me just kind of like just drop this in really quick. So Clemson dropped to 23, right? They dropped 12 spots after their loss, right? No SEC or Big Ten team has ever dropped that low. And Bama, just to give you an idea, Bama fell only 6 spots after losing to Vandy, who we didn't know at that time was good. So Vanderbilt was essentially I don't even know, the Indiana on a normal year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not the Indiana that this year. And they
Yeah.
only
Wake
let them
Forest.
fall. Yeah, they only let them fall. They only the Wake Forest exactly. Um, Only let them fall 6 spots to punish Clemson, doubling the amount of the drop, 12 spots, to what I think is a really good Louisville team. Let's not forget Louisville's been racked with injuries preseason and in the season. So it's not like, oh, they're playing with the full team and this is their record. They're really, I mean, you are what your record says you are, but I'm saying with the talent pool they had coming into the season, I think they were a really, really good team. So to me, I think there's a little bit of conference bias, to be honest with you. I
Yeah.
think there's some teams in there that just shouldn't be as high as they are. I think BYU getting stiffed at number what are they, 6? What? Yeah, number 6. I don't know, man. If this was the BCS, it would be completely different. Indiana and BYU would be much higher. You know, and
Yep.
to me, it's like, okay, well, what are we doing? What is the threshold? And so, the other thing I was thinking of too, and we'll get into this in the bracket. We have the bracket here up on the screen because you can see where each one is playing. But the big issue I got into was that, I feel like there should be preference shown to teams that make their conference championship game. And, barring a blowout, there should not be more than a drop of maybe one max. Again, if it's a bad loss, like let's just say BYU plays Colorado, who we're going to talk about towards the end of the show, right? And they lose by two touchdowns, right? Because they have there's an injury or whatever. I think at max BYU should draw from the 3rd seed to like maybe the 6th seed because they're a really good team. They'll be an 11-1 team, at the end of the season, and there'll be teams like Notre Dame, Texas A&M, Alabama. Who else is on here?
Texas.
Texas. Well, Boise State's going to be playing. I think Texas is going to be playing for. I'm trying to think of teams that won't be playing for their conference championship, right? And they're going to have that off week. And so if you're being forced to play an extra game, right, to play for your conference championship, there shouldn't be. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying this because it's like, oh, well, you're just saying that because you're a Miami fan. You're going to play SMU, and there's a good chance you guys could lose. No, I'm not saying that. I mean, yeah, we may very well lose to SMU, but I still don't think an 11-1 Miami team should be either out of the playoffs or even at a low seed like an 11 or 10 seed. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, let's look at it this way. The Louisville team that you mentioned is really good. Their only losses are to Miami, I believe
Notre
SMU,
Dame?
and Notre Dame,
Notre
who
Dame,
are
yeah.
all very highly ranked teams. And what they did, they took care of a ranked Clemson team. And I think maybe their punishment was also just the manner in which they lost. Not that they lost to Louisville, but the fact that it was at home. They never looked like they were in it. Their offense struggled. And frankly, there's some coaching decisions that really leave you scratching your head, where everyone used to call Dabo Swinney, a genius coach, and used to criticize other coaches for similar mistakes. Where like you're down was like 11 points. You don't kick you kick the extra points. They're going for 2
Yeah.
late in the game to give yourself a chance at it. Like there was all sorts of weird stuff that was going on that I think punished Clemson in that one. But yeah, there's a real possibility that like a 1 loss or a 2 loss, conference runner up in the ACC doesn't make it to the playoff, which would be frankly criminal. But at the same
Yeah.
time, that's why you have to play every single game and hopefully look good. We already know that the ACC is behind the 8 ball when it comes to being compared to the other Power 4 conferences. So every game matters, and that's where if you're a Miami homer like us, you love that 1-0 mentality, and it's something that every team kind of takes in with them. So definitely a possibility there to make that happen. But at the same time, let's see where the rest of this plays out, because if the SEC continues to cannibalize itself, a 1-loss conference champion or a 2-loss conference runner-up might still get it.
How important do you think, when not looking at the bracket, we have the bracket up, by the way, looking at the bracket, how important do you think home field advantage is going to be for some of these teams? Because, you know, yes, some of the teams like you, but you get like an Alabama at, let's just say, if it all ended right now, right? And Alabama at Texas, like, again, Alabama beat Georgia, but Georgia beat Texas. It's like one of those weird things where it's like, I don't even, it doesn't even like, and Texas lost at home. Their only loss is at home. Do
Yep,
you
to
think,
Georgia, who
yeah.
blew them out. Yeah.
So like, how important do you think home field advantage is really going to be in the playoffs this first year?
It'll be interesting. Like, I think it depends on the atmosphere and the environment. Like, if it's 2 big teams like that facing off each other, it may not mean as much. But like, if you have a matchup where it's like a BYU that's going on the road and playing like I'm not looking at the bracket. Obviously, I know it's on the screen, but like a BYU plays Ohio State in the Horseshoe, for example, that's a big environment. That's the biggest environment that BYU's played in probably over a decade. So
Right.
I think it all depends on just a team by team basis. Miami having to go on the road, or granted, if they win the conference championship, it'll be a neutral site. There's a possibility that they might end up in the Orange Bowl game as that
Yeah.
semifinal, which would be incredible.
That's what I'm
But
hoping for.
right. So like I think the first round is definitely going to matter in terms of home field advantage because they don't get treated in terms of ticket allocation like a neutral site. So that's going to be a big deal. I'm sure there may not be they're going to have a set allotment for road teams, but it's not going to be as widely available because everybody is going to want to go to that first home stadium hosted playoff game to make that
Yeah.
work. So, yeah.
And with teams like Alabama in there, teams like Tennessee, I know Penn State, Notre Dame, they all have only one loss. Everyone else is either undefeated or one loss. What do you think the cutoff is? Is it 2 losses? Is it 3 losses? Like what? Like once you reach a certain number, what do you think is the cutoff?
I think it kind of depends on how the entire conference window shakes out too. So you have like a bunch of 2-loss teams in conference. I think
Right.
your cutoff is going to be 2 losses of whoever makes it to the championship game and maybe like one other that looked really well. But like,
Okay.
for example, look, the ACC is probably going to have a couple of 1-loss teams and a couple of them aren't even going to make the championship game. And given the strength of record and how those schedules play out, that's not going to help them. They're going to get left out. So it's a matter of just how many of those 2-loss teams are left at the end and how do they cannibalize each other. That's similar, safe answer, but at the same time, you got to the whole thing about these committees that they're supposed to look at the entire body of work. So it's like, what does the team look like at the end of the year versus what happened at the beginning, and who did they beat along the way, and how did the other teams look? So a strong team at the beginning of the year that has like 2 losses late-ish in the year, that's going to cancel themselves out. But if there's a second loss that happens, somewhere halfway, that might bail them out.
So I'm looking over at the standings right now in the Big Ten because this is something that's like really kind of interested me. So I talked about the I noticed there were 4 SEC teams and 4 Big Ten teams in the top 12. Right now, again, all of these teams, Indiana, Ohio State, have to play each other again, and then quite possibly Ohio State and Oregon quite possibly could play again. Now, if you have a 1-loss Penn State, right? A 1-loss Indiana and a 2-loss Ohio State. Who gets the higher seeding?
I think it depends on where they finish in a championship game. So Ohio State, we're hypothetically saying they're 2-loss, but they're losing to Oregon for a second time in the Big Ten championship game. They have to have the higher seed because they played the extra game. They're the one that qualified to get in. Did they lose? Yeah, but so was any of those other 1-loss Big Ten teams that go in. So
Yeah.
hypothetically, I think 4 Big Ten teams get in because in terms of what their schedules look like, they don't play each other either. So like, we're expecting that 1 loss from Indiana to come. Well, they haven't played Ohio State yet, right? That's either coming up this
That's what
weekend
I
or
was
next
saying because
weekend.
like that's
Right.
why I said like a 2-loss Ohio State because excuse me, they could lose to Indiana and then
They
not
could.
even make make the Big Ten championship, and they would be like Penn State on the
Right.
outside watching in, which means that Oregon would go play Indiana. And then again, going back with what I think should be the kind of like the stipulation where if you're playing a conference championship, you shouldn't drop that much. You have
Yep.
Oregon beat Indiana. Obviously, Oregon keeps their number 1 seed, but
Yep.
Indiana would still keep a pretty high 5th seed. I would say the
100%.
lowest, right? And
Right.
or 6th seed, right? Which then again, where do you put up a 1-loss Penn State versus a 2-loss Ohio State, and Ohio State beat Penn State?
Yep. No,
And
that's the
you see
scenario
where I'm
there.
going? You see where I'm going
Right.
with these scenarios? And it's like, to me, it's like, you almost kind of want to figure out like, what is the cutoff? Because then you go into the SEC and it's a very similar situation where, and we're going to talk about these games coming up, where you could have a team with 3 losses who didn't play for the national championship, didn't play for their conference championship. And now they're a 6th or 7th seed, which to me, I'm like, you got 3
Yeah, that
losses
would
and
be yeah, that's insane on my end too. Like that's where you
right.
have to honor the records, and even if it's like a group of 5 or like an independent that has a better record, they should be seated higher just from the principle of they lost less games. And
Exactly.
if the schedule is so much harder, then great, they can go on the road. You have to be punished for having a loss in some way. If you get included
I
in the playoff, be the lower seed and go on the road and play somebody.
I agree, and I think wins matter. I think how you play, and how you finish your season. That's literally been the mantra for college football up until this year, right? Even with the college football playoffs from the last 10 years with the four teams, if you had more than one loss, like there was most likely a chance you're out. Like you're not
Yep.
in. And in the BCS, same thing. BCS, if you weren't perfect, forget it. Don't even consider playing for a national championship. That's not going to happen. So with this 12 team, it's like, okay, well, now we're really bending the rules for basically SEC teams and Big 10 teams. And like to me, I'm just like, I get it, they're good, don't get me wrong, but we've seen throughout the years, especially when you get to the bowl season, ACC or Big 12 teams play SEC teams and they get blown out or they get beat outright. And it's not like they're this upper echelon, higher pecking order conference. They are good, but when you get past the two dominant teams, things tend to start to even out, you know?
And let's not forget that's exactly how the early half of this season played out. The
Yep,
SEC had a losing record out of conference to start the year. Are those the same teams at the end of the year? No, but that's the body of work that comes through. So
exactly.
let's see what the landscape looks like, and it's a matter of eh, I think we've seen a lot from the different teams that are all in contention of like what the resumes show, and there
Right.
really is no clear cut favorite across that group. Yeah, there's a couple of undefeated teams, there's a couple of one loss and two loss teams, but nobody really has separated themselves as a cut above the rest. So we can assume at this point that any given Saturday or whatever the day is that the game is being played, there's a likelihood that any team can be beat
Yeah.
until proven otherwise.
Well, speaking of the college football playoff, we have our first elimination Saturday for many teams over in the SEC. The Crimson Tide roll into Death Valley to take on the number 15 LSU Tigers. Rudy, how does Kalen DeBoer keep Alabama from its third loss?
I think they're fortunate they're playing LSU in that scenario. The only problem is because it's in Death Valley, I think that plays a little bit of a part. I mean, look, Alabama's losses have been on the road. They lost at Vandy. They're 0 for 2 in the state of Tennessee. So probably the only thing good in Kalen DeBoer's camp is that they're
They're
not
not
playing in
playing in
Tennessee.
Tennessee. Yeah.
They're playing in Louisiana. I'm pretty sure they do pretty well in Death Valley as of now. And frankly, it's a tough sled because LSU got dog walked by Texas A&M, but that was in Aggieland. I think we kind of saw that one coming because we didn't think that Texas A&M was going to drop another home loss after Notre Dame earlier in the season. So, yeah, this one's tough. I think the only thing going for Bama is that it's not a team from Tennessee.
Yeah, the last time Bama lost 3 games was in 2010. They went 10-3. They were
Yep.
finished 4th in the SEC
What?
West. Yeah, and LSU for the last couple of years has lost 3 to 4 games. It's a must-win game. And I don't say that like, oh, it's Bama, LSU like that. Yes, it's both teams need to win for their fan bases, for recruiting, all of those things. But in the sense for playing for the playoffs, it is absolutely a must-win because if you do lose this game, you are out of contention for the playoffs. It's
Yep.
just one of them will hop the other, and that's it. And also it's kind of a similar problem that BYU has where both teams really don't have a marquee game after this that they can kind of boost their resume up with by winning. You know what I mean? Like the
Yep.
rest of their schedules are pretty manageable on both sides. This is the last hurrah for both of them. It's actually the first time since 2006 both teams enter with multiple losses. I thought that was a really cool, a little fun fact. And the thing is for me, I think I was doing a ton of research on this game because I found this really cool site that kind of breaks down all these cool stats. Statistically, Bama is the better team, both
Yep.
offensively and defensive. Bama is scoring on average more points with 37.6 versus LSU, who only is scoring 31.1. They're allowing less points per game with 18.6 versus LSU's 23. LSU is holding on to the ball almost 5 minutes longer on average, though, than Bama, who has struggled to get their defense off. That's why they lost to both teams in Tennessee. They
Yep.
just could not get their defense off, especially on third downs, which on top of that, LSU is converting 50%. They have a 50% conversion rate when it comes to third downs, which isn't good. Another marquee matchup you're going to kind of want to watch is how do LSU's wide receivers, receiving core match up against Bama's DBs, who are only allowing 50% passing completions to opposing wide receivers. That's going to be interesting because Bama's DBs have been very hit or miss this season. You know, I mean, they've played for the most part really sound, but there are plays where they have let explode, kind of like our DBs, not as bad. but have let these explosive plays come that have allowed teams to stay in it especially on that third down when they could literally end drives. They're giving them more time. I thought another interesting stat was can LSU control the clock with their run game, because LSU is passing when their rush compared to their passer, they're passing 60% compared to 40%. And only 26% of their yardage output is coming from rushing. So they're a very one-dimensional team. So it's going to be interesting to see how these two teams fare, because again, LSU has won 15 straight games at night in Death Valley. Brian Kelly is 13-0 in Tiger Stadium at night.
It was a good run.
Yeah,
It was a good run.
you're picking Bama too?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a big Brian Kelly believer at LSU. They get a win every now and then, but I understand, like, yeah, Death Valley at night. Yeah, you know what? The other Death Valley at night was also a scary place to play, and Louisville looked pretty good in that one. So
That's a great point. That's yeah, I mean, here's another crazy stat I just picked up too. LSU, if they can contain Jalen Monroe, that'll be a miracle, because LSU has struggled against mobile QBs at South Carolina and Texas A&M, allowing each quarterback on design runs, not like, oh, like the pocket broke down, he had to scramble. Like, these are design, like dives, QB sneaks, whatever they are, 6.5 yards a carry. That's wild. Like, could you imagine if like every time like Dawson drew up a play for Cam Ward, he's like, hey, listen, I want you to run, and you're going to get a guaranteed 6.5 yards. Like, even Damian Martinez doesn't get that. And so, like, I mean, if LSU does not lock them down, and again, they got to rely on that run game. I mean, they did really good with their run game against South Carolina. That's, I think, what kept them in that game against South Carolina. But if they stay one dimensional, I think Bama runs away with this. And poor Brian Kelly, that guy is going to be under a lot of heat. Well, from one SEC battle to another with equally important ramifications for the playoff hopes, last year Lane Kiffin kept it simple in his post-game interview after losing to Georgia. They just have to get better players. Rudy, does Ole Miss do it? Do the changes they made, do the pickups they made in the transfer portal, is this enough, or are they going to take another L to Georgia?
this one's tough because, like, they have better players, yes, but their offense, has Jekyll and Hyde kind of moments. They look good. They don't look good. Do they match up well with Georgia's defense? Absolutely. I mean, we've seen what Alabama's offense could do against that Georgia secondary.
Yeah,
Jackson
that's a good
Dart
point.
is arguably a better quarterback than Jalen Milroe when it comes to throwing the ball, even though Milroe has a better deep ball and a more consistent deep ball. It's one of those things where I think it's more it's the matchup of Georgia's offense versus Ole Miss's defense that I'm really looking at. And Ole Miss has improved their defense. Georgia continues to struggle offensively. They did have
Yeah.
success
Oof.
against Florida late last week, but that's also Florida. That's not Ole Miss. Remind me, who's the home team in that one again? Is that in Athens or is that in Oxford?
No, it's in Oxford. It's in
It's in
Oxford this year.
Oxford.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. The last time they were heavily favored at home, they lost to, was it Arkansas? They had some awful loss on their schedule. Since they already
Yeah.
got that one out of the way, I don't think they do that twice.
No, it was
I'll say
Kentucky. That you're talking about this year?
that's right,
Yeah,
Kentucky.
Kentucky. It was Kentucky
We're
this year. Oh, an
they're not
ugly game.
doing. We know they're not doing the sip end zones this time. If they, that's my padlock stat to take a Josh Pate reference. If we watch that game and we see that the sip is written in the end zones, I got Georgia all day. If they go back to just being normal ass Ole Miss, then I'll take the Rebels.
Yeah, Ole Miss to me is like, they're like the Penn State of the SEC, man. Like they look good, but like, my God, they cannot get it. They can't get the big wins if their life depended on it. Poor Lane Kiffin, he cannot beat Georgia. He can't beat Bama. I mean, he does, he maybe once in a blue moon, yes, but like, he hasn't, and he hasn't looked dominant against these teams. And he went to the transfer portal this season. He went and he got all the dogs that he wanted, that he thought he could compete with Georgia. But if I was to tell you at the beginning of the season, let's meditate on this for a quick second. If I told you at the beginning of the season, Jackson Dart would be head and shoulders better, a better QB than Georgia's QB, would you believe me?
Yeah, I would, only because remember Carson Beck, the handwriting was kind of on the wall last year. You know, we've talked about it at length, and I'm sure every broadcast crew that talks to Georgia still says, well, he doesn't have Lad McConkey anymore, he doesn't have Brock Bowers anymore, and that's been kind of the story where it's either he hasn't had a great game in terms of locating, or the new supporting staff around him in the wide receiver core are not helping him out with his throws either. Because
Yeah.
look, as much as you could blame Carson Beck for certain things, if you go back to like the Alabama loss, you could blame Colby Young for not playing that 50-50 ball against a freshman defensive back. So
Yeah. That's
there's
fair.
it goes both ways. And I don't think you can completely shoulder the blame on Carson Beck. Yes, he does have some because look, you're supposed to be an NFL prospect. You're supposed to be able to dissect defenses, change protections at the line, audible to different routes. That's all on you. But if your receivers don't, put in half that effort, you can only do so much.
Yeah, Mississippi is number 2 in explosive plays behind Miami. I mean, they are an incredible explosive team. I mean, I don't know if they're gonna have Trey Harris, who's their star wide receiver, but they crushed Arkansas without him, and he's been out the last 2 weeks. So it's like, do they need him? I don't know. He definitely would help, obviously, but I think where the real important battles is going to be, obviously, we say it a lot of times, it's the battle in the trenches. Is it going to be how is Georgia's O line, which is 6th lowest in passer rating in the country, versus Mississippi's D line? Mississippi's D line has twice the amount of sacks and rates and pressures, and has the most sacks in the SEC. So it's like, how is Georgia's O line hold up? I mean, if Georgia's O line holds up and they can keep those DNs and D tackles at bay, and they're not flooding the backfield, I think they're great, because Carson Beck throws at 89%. He has an 89% completion rate when he's clean. Drops to 33% when he's under duress. His QBR when he's in the pocket clean, I believe, is at 94 and drops to 0. 0 when he's under pressure. So we're talking about like two completely different quarterbacks when the pocket collapses. So it's like, can Georgia hold that line, and keep the dogs at bay? And then can they run it? Because we've talked about it. Georgia has been just like LSU, has been a one-dimensional team. I don't know why they're struggling. I mean, I know they had a running back go down, and they've had to rely on ETN more, and Frazier's kind of picking it up a little bit. But I mean, they're not running it like they did last year. I mean, last year
Nope.
they ran for 300 yards against Ole Miss. UGA this year is 97th in rushing
Yep.
attempts, not yards, like just
Yep.
handing the ball off. Like, that is horrific. I mean, you're not going to get anywhere with that. And we know that, like, okay, battle in the trenches, and then who controls the ground game? Who controls the clock? Right? I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, when I was doing my homework on this game, statistically, Mississippi is the far better team. They lead in passing, receiving, and rushing. I mean, basically, offensively, they are the far better team. Sadly, I'm going Georgia. I think Georgia's still gonna.
I
Again,
love the way you set that up. That was fantastic.
I just, again, using, that's why I set it up with the Penn State reference. I'm like,
Yep.
they're just not going to win. I mean, it sucks, but I mean, here's the thing: if Georgia can control the ground game, like I was just talking about, they're good. If it's a
Yep.
shootout and it's just aerial assaults, I don't think Georgia's built for that.
Yep.
I mean, you saw that with the Alabama game, with their one loss. They don't like to get into shootouts or even play from behind. They're not good like that. They like to play games. A great example of what Georgia likes to play, because I think it was one of their more dominant games, is when you look at the Texas game, right? Stifling defense, semi-decent offense, right? Like, it's just like, get the ball moving a little bit to where it's not in the opposing team's hand, and then just when the opposing team has the ball, you are just pounding them. I think if Georgia dominates on defense, this game's over. It's a quick win. Who do you have?
I'm going to go back to I need to see a flyover of the field before it starts. If I see SIP end zones, I'm taking Georgia. If I see Ole Miss end zones, I'm taking Ole Miss. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, yeah. It's all about the sip, man. It's all about the sip.
It's not. That's the thing. It's not.
And finally, we have one of the biggest surprises coming out of the Big 12. While programs like Utah, Kansas State, and even Iowa State were favored to win the conference, a dark horse, or shall I say, Bison, could find their way into the college football playoff. Rudy, how does Coach Prime and the Buffs make it to the playoffs?
Beat BYU. That's what you have to do. I mean, run the table on your schedule and beat BYU, because the one thing that they do have going for them is they have a media hype machine like nowhere else. Coach Prime is a fantastic personality on top of being a coach. So there's nobody that around the country that's going to not know about Colorado. They're just that topic to talk about. So,
Yeah.
and also don't let's not shake this as much as we think Cam Ward is like the Heisman runner. A lot of people in the country are picking Travis Hunter for
Yeah.
playing, both ways. And we can argue the stats all we want, but he's a compelling personality and he's, making a case for himself coming back from injury. So win out and they're in the playoff. Do they lose another one? Possibly. And I think that's going to spell, the end of their playoff hopes.
Well, I think they have their biggest challenge this week against Texas Tech. It's going to be a good old fashioned shootout. Texas Tech has given up 300 passing yards or more 3 times this season. Colorado will be one of the best teams they'll be playing and have faced, if not the best team, and when it comes to the aerial assault portion of it. Texas Tech is coming off a major win after beating Iowa State. That was I didn't. No one ever saw that coming. I don't think. And Texas Tech has played they've had a good record, but when you look and you get into the nitty-gritty, like they let Abilene Christian score 52 on them. Like they're eking these victories out. They're a really good offensive team, but like as a team in general, I don't think they're that good. Texas Tech has the ninth worst coverage grade in the country, which does not bode well when you're playing Shador Sanders and Travis Hunter. Texas Tech gives up 35 points per game on average. That
Yeah.
is a lot of points. I mean,
Not good.
it's basically our defense. Well, in conference play. Um, Texas Tech, they though, this is again, we got to look at all sides of things. Texas Tech does have a great running back though, in Taj Brooks. And I think the more reps you give him, the more you feed him the ball, I think the higher your odds get at beating Colorado. Texas Tech ranks 105th in rushing attempts on average, rushing only 40% of the time. So they have a very similar issue as Georgia and LSU. You can see kind of the through line I went through in picking these games. I think Colorado needs to keep Texas Tech out of the red zone because Texas Tech has one of the most ridiculous success rates in the end zone. They're ranked, they have a 97% success rate when they're in the end zone, which is number 5 in the nation. So if Colorado can keep Texas Tech out of the red zone, I think Colorado takes us home. I think again the secondary for Texas Tech is a little suspect. And I think this is I think Colorado and Dion know this is their last big opponent. This is the last challenge, we'll say, of the season. And so they're gonna come in ready to go. What do you think about the Buffs playing the Red Raiders?
I got the Buffs. Yeah, get your guns up. I got Colorado, because the thing is with them is, they have one loss on the year, but they do have to play BYU in this Big 12 championship game at some point in time. So this is a big game for them. But then once they get into the postseason, I know we talked about this already in a previous discussion about, if you lose your conference championship game, it shouldn't be held against you as much. I don't think two Big 12 teams get in. I don't think
Oh
BYU
no,
and
no, no.
Colorado both get in. So you have to
No.
win that one. So you have to win this to keep yourself from being eliminated. Unless you still make the conference championship game with 2 losses, you can't lose that game either. So yeah,
I
that's
mean,
why that's why I think it's important for them to win this game.
yeah, I mean, we said at the beginning of the year, and we've alluded to it all season. There will only be one Big 12 team in the playoffs. I just don't think there's, and I mean they're all cannibalizing each other in general, but I
Yep.
also don't think the quality of the teams are on par to warrant 2 teams.
Yeah.
But I mean, I do want to say, like, as much as I can't stand Deion Sanders at times getting the attention he does, you got to give the man his flowers because look at how we're talking about them in his 3rd season, or is it his second season? His second season, excuse me. It's his
Second
second
season. Yeah.
season. I mean, this guy took a program that was 0-11 and was losing games by I think it was an average of 29 points a game to now being in consideration for a Big 12 championship if they win this weekend, because then again, like I said, the rest of their schedule is very manageable. And then quite possibly if they beat BYU, which again, any given Saturday, anything can happen, playing for in the college football playoff, that's huge. And then you have teams in Florida, Billy Napier and Mike Norvell over there, who are barely struggling to keep powerhouse programs afloat. I just think that speaks a lot for Deion Sanders, and the man deserves his flowers.
Hey, let's break something here first. If they do find a way to get out of Mike Norvell's buyout at some point in time in the next couple of years, I think we know who the first phone call is going to be.
Oh, yes. And especially with his sons gone. Yeah, absolutely. I think Dion would love that. I think the issue though is this though. I think I was watching Locked On Seminoles and Brian Smith who does Locked On Seminoles. He brought up a very good point. He was like the person that they're going to bring in for FSU also needs to be an incredible recruiter because that's one of Mike Norvell's biggest issues is he's not a good high school recruiter. He can go into the portal and snag guys, but when it comes to actual recruiting and going, into homes and things like that, he doesn't have what the kids call the Riz. He's not locking these deal downs. He doesn't have the loafers like Mario. And apparently Dion has a very similar problem where because of his foot issue, for those of you who may not know, Dion
Yeah,
Sanders is missing one of his feet because I don't know, but he's missing half of his foot. So he doesn't like to travel or walk a lot. So even at Colorado, he doesn't do a lot of in-home recruiting or in-home visits at all. So when you talk about the FSU job, yes, top of mind, he's the first go-to. But when you really kind of break it down, you need someone who's going to be a really good recruiter, who's going to be able to go into the South and just because remember, FSU competes with Alabama, they compete with Georgia in that region. So
yep,
I think Dion would be great, but I just also think when matching up in terms of like what his skill sets are and what he likes to do compared to what is going to be needed at FSU, I don't know if that's going to be the greatest mix, but
makes sense.
we'll see. Well, Rudy, we got another one in the books, my man. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for everyone who's been subscribing. Let us know what you thought of our college football talks. Let us know what you thought about our wins this week. Until next week, be good, y'all. Win the weekend. And as always, go Canes.
Can I just end one thing on like a slightly somber note though?
Go ahead. Oh, are
So
you gonna don't do it. Don't do
I
it.
yeah, I
Oh
kind of
man.
have to. I'm sorry. Like,
Go. I know where
look,
you're going.
we have to go here and just say, look, as much as you may disagree with some of the college football pundits that are out there, uh, big
Kirk.
condolences to Kirk
Kirk
Herbstreit,
Herbstreit,
who
yeah.
lost his
Lost his
dog
dog.
Ben. For those of you that know, he's kind of like the dog that took over college football this year. The older, elderly golden retriever that was traveling with him from
And on Thursday
college
Night
game
Football too on
day.
Amazon.
Yep. So the poor guy, had all sorts of like I think he had like a tumor in his spine towards like the back, and he was
Yeah, I
getting
went to all
uh,
his organs. Yeah, they had to put him down.
yeah,
I hate stories like this, man. No one wants to put their dog down. It's the worst.
me too. That's why I figured like, hey, we all whether we agree with you or not for half of your takes, we're really sorry because nobody
Yeah,
wants to see that happen.
we are. And on that note, you know, thanks for killing the vibe, Rudy.
I'm sorry. Go Canes.
We'll see you guys for our recap against Georgia Tech, guys. Have a great week.